Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Children's History Hour. My name is Michaela Worden, and I am the Education Assistant here at the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum. So today, we are going to learn about how things grow and change over time. You grow, plants grow, and even cities grow. Speaking of cities, our city, Colorado Springs, used to be very, very small with just a few buildings, and over many, many, many years, it has grown to the size it is today. So before we begin, I love to do stretches so that way we can get our thinker thinking. So if everybody real quick wants to stretch our arms up way up to the ceiling, can you touch the top of the ceiling? I don't think I can. I think I'm a little bit too short, but maybe you can. Can you stretch out to the side? Oh, that feels really, really good, doesn't it? Can you lean a little bit to the right? Can you lean a little bit to the left? All right, can you maybe wave your arms up and down? Get our shoulders all stretched out too. All right, how about our fingers? Can we wiggle our fingers? Can we wiggle our nose up and down like a bunny rabbit? How about let's roll our shoulders, roll them real quick. Oh, that feels really good. Okay, so I have a really neat challenge that I want you guys to do today. We have an artifact, a very old artifact here at the Colorado Springs Pioneers Museum, and I want you to try and guess what that artifact is. So I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint screen and I'm going to show you an image. It's only part of the artifact. So your job is to try and guess what that artifact is. And at the very end, I will show you the whole entire picture, and we'll see if your answer is correct. So let me pull this up real quick. Alrighty. So this is our really neat artifact. This was an object that was used to help build. So this is something you use probably, some people use it every day depending on their job. Maybe you use it when you have a craft, but this is something that you would have used to build homes and buildings. So back when Palmer was building this city, and we'll get to Palmer here in a little bit and his fun story, they would have used this type of object to help start building the city. So again, can you figure out what this object is? And if you know, make sure to put it in the comment section for us so we can see what it is that you think that it is. All right, so let's get back to this gentleman, Mr. Palmer. His name was William Jackson Palmer, and he was originally a general during the Civil War. And while he was working for the Kansas Pacific Railroad, he ended up traveling from Pueblo to Denver in a wagon. And what he was doing, his job while he was working for the Kansas Pacific Railway, was to spot the land. He was supposed to look at the land and try to figure out where is a good place to lay track for the trains that were supposed to come through. So as he's looking and as he's traveling, they end up traveling out here to Colorado and end up going from Pueblo to Denver in a wagon. While he was looking, he ends up going in a couple of the streams, and then he ends up having breakfast in Garden of the Gods one day. And so he's seeing all this beautiful scenery around him. And he fell in love with it. And he thought, one day, this is going to be a spot where a famous resort is going to be. So he thought about this for a year and he just kept thinking, man, this is just such a great place to build a resort or a city or town. And so he thought about it and he thought about it. And then finally, in the year 1871, he founded Colorado Springs. And with the help of many people, Palmer was able to create a successful city. And just like you and I, the city grew every single day. And so now at the huge way that it is now, this is the city of Colorado Springs. So as you can see here, not only did the city grow of Colorado Springs, but Mr. William Jackson Palmer, he also grew as well. So here is a picture of him when he was serving during the Civil War. And then here are the years after. So do you guys see any differences? He looks a little bit younger here, right? Here he looks a little bit older. I think he's got a very impressive mustache going on here. So yeah, he grew just like us. So one thing that was really neat, we have a quote from Palmer about what he saw that the city could become. So what he said was, the aim was intensely practical, to create a habitable and successful town in the broadest sense of the word. Now that's got some fancy words in there, so let me break this down for you a little bit. So basically what Palmer thought is he wanted to be able to create a town that would be successful, that would be long lasting, and where people could live for generations and generations. And today, we still have people that have been here in Colorado Springs for at least 100 years. And so I think his dream actually came true, and he actually ended up creating a very successful city. So my next fun bit for you guys to do is we're going to look at some old pictures and some newer pictures of Colorado Springs. Your job is to figure out which ones are the oldest and which ones are the newest, okay? So I have them on a PowerPoint screen and they're kind of all jumbled together. And so you're going to need to look at color. You're going to need to look at how many buildings there are. Are there roads? What form of transportation are they using? And this should give you a good idea to see how old the picture is or how new the picture is. You guys ready for the challenge? Alrighty. So here are the 4 pictures that we have. Now, this one right here is in color, kind of what we would see today with a lot of photographs, right? So this one, this is what I'm thinking, but I'm thinking this one's probably going to be a newer one. So I'm going to put that in the back of my mind, make sure it's there. I'm going to save that in the newer section. Now these other 3 photos are a little bit difficult. They're black and white, these 2 up here, and this one's a little bit yellow in there. So I can tell these are a little bit older. What should we look for? Well, let's count the buildings, shall we? This one has quite a few buildings, and I think it's going to be a little hard to count all of them. So this one's pretty good size. What are some noticeable traits you can see? I can see right here that looks like some roads. Right here looks like maybe a highway. Ooh, right here, here's a really good indicator, right? Transportation. Do you guys see the cars? All these little tiny little dots right here, these are all cars. What about the trees? Do you guys see any trees here? I see a couple trees here and there. Okay, so this one has a lot going on to it, right? This one looks a little bit, kind of resembles a little bit like our newer picture right here. So keep this in mind. This one's a little bit close to this one. And remember, we talked about trees, we talked about cars, we talked about roads, and there's a lot of buildings. So I don't know where that one goes yet, but maybe it goes in the middle. We'll see. All right, what about this one over here to the left? Now this one is not, there's not as many buildings as these other 2 photographs, right? Let's see, there's still quite a few buildings. I think a little bit too many to count right now, but there's quite a few buildings here. What do we not see? You know what I don't see? I don't see any paved roads. Do you guys see any paved roads? These right here look like dirt roads. So I think, I don't know what you think, but I think that this photograph right here is probably older than this photograph. Not only do we not have any paved roads, but do you guys see any cars? I don't see any. You know what I see? I see a horse and a carriage and a man riding in it. So maybe that's the main form of transportation back then. So that would have been way before cars, right? What else are we missing here? Ooh, do you guys see any trees? I don't see a lot of trees. All right, so maybe this one's definitely a little bit older than this one. Okay, let's keep that in there. And what about this last one right over here to the right? As you can see, how many buildings are there? Let's count them. This one we have enough where we can count them. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 buildings. So this one is definitely probably the oldest photo, right? What else do we not see? Let's look at the landscape. Are there any paved roads? I don't think so. What about cars? Do you see any cars? I don't see any cars. What about trees? I don't see any trees at all. Here's a big one. If we look back up at that other photograph up here in the upper left side, look at all the grass right here. And now look at the bottom right. Do you see any grass? I just see dirt. Okay, so if I were to be a good history detective on this and I were to guess, I'm going to say that the lower right one might be the oldest. I'm going to say this lower left one is the newest. Now the tricky part is, which is the middle? Which one comes first? So after this is the oldest, which one do you think is the next oldest? out of these two right here. I'm going to say this photograph right here, so the upper left, and then I'm going to say the upper right is the next oldest, and then finally today. So let's check our answers and see. Yes, so the lower right photograph that we looked at before, this photograph was taken in 1871, so when this city was beginning. So as you can see, our city was very, very small. It consisted of 6 buildings and maybe a couple houses scattered here and there. So not that big at all. We didn't have any grass, we didn't have any trees. All of those things had to be planted. So what Colorado Springs would have looked like, everywhere if you stood in the center of downtown, right here in front of the museum, if you looked all the way around, did a 360 turn, all you would see would be flat land, and it's going to be this short prairie grass everywhere. No trees, no grass. It's going to be pretty wide open, and you're not going to see anything for miles and miles around. So this is what Colorado Springs would have looked like back in 1871. If you could time travel all the way back then, you would see about 6 buildings and maybe a couple houses here and there. Not much going on. The next photograph was that upper left-hand one. So remember we talked about how there was no paved roads, there was no cars, the city is a little bit smaller looking and really no trees. This one was taken in 1890. So what we see is our city's starting to grow a little bit, right? So first year was 1871, and then after a few years, it starts to grow and grow and grow a little bit bigger. And then we get to the year 1925. We have really grown at this part, right? So now we've had so many people come in. Now we have paved roads because we need ways for people to be transported. We're starting to see trees pop up because people like to have that scenery there. Maybe people have grasses in their backyards. So all this ends up growing and growing and growing. And finally, to today, we are such a huge city and we're still growing, right? It's never stopping. We are still growing today. So for those of you, remember how I talked about we were going to do that artifact and I wanted you to guess what it was? So does anybody have any guesses? You want to put them in the comment section for me so I can see. What do you think it is? Let's go back. I'll show you again the artifact so you guys can see what it was. So as you can see, it has some wood part right here, and then it's got some metal. What kind of tool has metal and wood? And again, this is an older one, so maybe your tool at home, maybe you have one like this. Maybe it has a rubber handle or a plastic handle, but most of them, majority of these objects have this kind of metal right here on the top. So what do we think it's for? If you said a hammer, you are 100% correct. So this right here, what are hammers used for? They're used to hammer nails in, right? So whenever you build anything, whenever you put up a structure, whenever you combine wood pieces together, you have to have a nail, and the only way to get the nail in is to use a hammer, right? Or what's this part right here? So this is the hammer bit right here. This part is what you use to hammer in the nail. But then this part right here, what is this for? This right here, it's kind of a odd little shape here. It makes kind of like a V shape, and that's to take out any nails. So maybe your nail has become rusted. Maybe I have done this many a time where I'll hammer in a nail and the nail, instead of going straight in, it'll get crooked or bent. And so I have to take the little V part and you stick it underneath the head of the nail and then you pop the nail out. So very important. This is what this is what people would have used in order to build Colorado Springs and to make it grow and to make it big. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. The last little bit that I have for you is a fun worksheet. It's called Build Your Own City. So whether you are watching this on Zoom or whether you're watching this on Facebook, you should be able to find a link that you can click on, and it will be a little packet. And then what you can do, the fun craft that we have, is you guys will be able to build your own city. So I'm going to stop share real quick. So this right here is the city that you can build. There are little buildings, you can color them, churches, shopping centers, a fire station, hospital, homes, and what you do is you would build your own city and figure out where everything that you want to go is. So thank you again so much for joining us. I hope you had a wonderful Children's History Hour today with me, and I'm so glad you joined. I hope you all stay safe, have happy holidays, and we'll see you next year. Thanks, guys.